The city lights spilled into my small apartment, reflecting off the glass coffee table I bought secondhand, but polished like it was new. Every corner of this space carried my effort. Late nights at work, skipped vacations, budgeting every paycheck, just to afford rent on time. To me, it wasn't just an apartment. It was proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet, even when no one else believed I could. Growing up, my parents rarely looked at me the way they looked at Elaine. She was the golden child, the one who needed more attention, who was delicate. I was the one told to toughen up, to understand, to be the responsible one. Over the years, I learned not to expect fairness, but the ache never fully left. Still, within these walls, I felt safe. This was my sanctuary, far from the constant comparisons and dismissals that came with family gatherings. Here, I didn't have to compete with Elaine's laughter echoing in every room, or her careless demands always being met. Sometimes I'd catch myself thinking, if only they could see me for who I am here, independent, capable, enough. But I knew better. To them, Elaine would always shine brighter, even if I was the one holding everything together. And yet, I clung to this place. Because in this apartment, for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was finally living. It started with little comments, the kind that sound harmless if you don't look too closely. Elaine would walk through my apartment, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and smirk like she owned the place. "This layout is perfect," she said once, twirling around my living room. "I can already picture where I'll put my vanity." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just her usual entitled chatter. But when she kept bringing it up, at dinners, on family calls, even in front of our parents, it stopped being funny. "Elaine just likes to dream," my mother told me one evening, sipping tea at my dining table like she was the rightful hostess. Don't take it so seriously. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, staring at the empty spot on the coffee table where my keys should have been. Elaine's laughter still echoed in my head, mingling with the calm certainty in my parents' voices. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even suggested. They had simply decided, like my years of work, my sacrifices, my independence, were theirs to distribute. By morning, my chest felt heavy, as though someone had stacked bricks on my lungs. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the one name I knew I could call without explanation. "Taylor," I whispered when she answered. "Can I come over?" Her voice was steady, a lifeline. Always. Taylor lived across town in a sunlit apartment filled with plants and secondhand furniture that somehow looked like art. She wrapped me in a hug the moment I walked through her door, then pushed a mug of chamomile tea into my hands. I told her everything. The dinner, the keys, the way Elaine had smiled like a queen being crowned. Words spilled out faster than I could control them, years of swallowed hurt finally breaking free. Taylor listened quietly, nodding, her eyes soft but sharp, with understanding. When I finally ran out of breath, she leaned forward. "Natalie, you've been letting them write the rules for your whole life. You think you're being strong by staying quiet, but strength isn't about silence. It's about choosing yourself, even if it means walking away." Her words sank deep, stirring something restless inside me. I thought about the apartment, the nights I'd come home exhausted but proud, the mornings I'd brewed coffee and watched the sunrise through the blinds. That place wasn't just walls and furniture, it was me. It was proof that I'd built a life without leaning on anyone else, and my parents had tossed it to Elaine like spare change. Tears blurred my vision, but this time they weren't only from pain. They were from recognition, an understanding that I'd been waiting all my life for their validation, and it was never going to come. Taylor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't owe them compliance. You owe yourself freedom." That night, back in my apartment, I stood in the center of the living room and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time, I saw the place not as a refuge, but as a battlefield. One my parents thought they could claim without resistance, but they didn't know what Taylor knew. They didn't know what I had finally started to understand. I was done playing the strong, silent one. I was done being invisible. If Elaine wanted my apartment, she could have the walls and the windows. But what she couldn't take, what none of them could take, was the life I had already started to build beyond these walls. The decision settled over me like a calm wave. I wasn't going to fight for this space. I was going to walk away from it on my own terms and leave them stunned in the silence of what they'd lost. Because the truth was, they hadn't taken my home. They'd just freed me from it. But it was serious. It was my home. Whenever I tried to talk about my job or the effort it took to live independently, the conversation quickly turned back to Elaine. Her classes, her friends, her plans. My father would beam at her, nodding proudly while I sat across the table invisible. Elaine's future is so bright, he'd say. We just need to make sure she has everything she needs to succeed. And I wanted to scream, what about me? Instead, I stayed quiet, folding the ache into my chest where no one could see it. I kept cleaning the apartment after their visits, like wiping away fingerprints would erase the reminder that they didn't see it as mine. The worst part wasn't even Elaine's arrogance. It was the silence of my parents, the way they let her claims hang in the air without ever correcting her. Each time, it was like they agreed she deserved my space more than I did. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before that silence turned into something worse. The first time. I realized Elaine's needs mattered more than mine. I was 10. She had thrown a tantrum over a bicycle she wanted, the shiny pink one with tassels on the handlebars. I had asked for a bike months earlier, but my request was brushed aside. That night, I watched from the porch as Dad wheeled Elaine's new bike into the yard, his face glowing with pride. "Be happy for your sister," Mom told me when she saw the tears I was trying to hide. "You're the strong one. You don't need as much." That phrase followed me like a shadow. You don't need as much. In high school, when I stayed up nights studying to earn scholarships, Elaine was sneaking out to parties. When she failed, a class my parents paid for private tutoring. When I got an A, they barely looked up from their phones. Their silence told me everything I needed to know. My achievements weren't worth celebrating because they expected me to succeed. I still remember one night, lying awake in my room, hearing my parents talk in the kitchen. Their voices carried through the vents. "Elaine needs more of our support," Dad said. "Natalie will be fine. She always is." And Mom's soft reply, "Yes, Elaine can't handle pressure. Natalie's stronger." Stronger. That word felt less like a compliment and more like a sentence. It meant no one would come to my rescue. It meant my pain was invisible, my needs negotiable. Those memories rushed back every time Elaine wandered through my apartment like it was hers. Every smirk, every careless comment, every indulgent smile from my parents, it all tied back to those years of being told to wait, to understand, to settle for less. By the time I stood in my kitchen, listening to Elaine joke again about her future apartment, the ache of my childhood was pressing against my ribs. The same story was playing out again, only now it wasn't toys or grades at stake. It was my life, my independence, my safe place. And for the first time, I wondered how much longer I could let them decide that what was mine didn't belong to me. The invitation came on a Wednesday evening, tucked into a casual phone call from my mother. "We're having dinner Sunday," she said, her voice cheerful, rehearsed. "It'll be good for the family to be together." I almost declined. The thought of another evening spent nodding through Elaine's stories while my own life was ignored made my stomach tighten. But a quiet instinct told me something was different this time. So I agreed. The restaurant was cozy, dimly lit, with burgundy tablecloths and the faint smell of roasted garlic drifting through the air. We sat at a round table near the back. Dad ordered wine, Mom fussed over the appetizers, and Elaine arrived late, as usual, sweeping in with that careless confidence only she could carry. "Sorry, traffic was insane," she said, sliding into her seat without apology in her tone. She was glowing, as though the world owed her its admiration. Dinner began the way it always did. Dad asking Elaine about her classes, Mom bragging about her charm, both of them smiling like she hung the stars. I tried to interject once, mentioning a project I'd completed at work, but the words barely left my mouth before the subject shifted back to Elaine's potential. Then, between bites of pasta, Dad cleared his throat. "Elaine's been under a lot of stress lately," he said, glancing at her with concern. "She needs some stability in her life, a place she can feel grounded." My mother nodded almost solemnly, and then she looked straight at me. "That's why we've decided Elaine will be staying in your apartment." I froze, fork halfway, to my lips. "Excuse me?" Before I could process, Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring of keys, my keys. He set them on the table and slid them across the white linen toward Elaine. Elaine grinned, her fingers closing, around the keys like they had always been hers. "Finally," she said, laughter bubbling in her throat. "I've been telling you guys, that place is perfect for me." The world seemed to tilt. The clinking of glasses, the chatter of other diners, it all blurred into a dull roar as my chest tightened. My parents' faces were calm, satisfied, like they'd solved a problem instead of creating one. I wanted to shout, to demand how they could hand over something I had bled and sacrificed for. But the years of being told to be the mature one chained my voice. So I swallowed hard, forcing composure, even as my hands trembled in my lap. I didn't argue that night. I let Elaine pocket my keys and boast about her plans, all while I sat there silent, my heart breaking behind a practiced smile. What they didn't know was that their decision wasn't the end of my story. It was the turning point. The following weekend, my parents invited me to brunch. Their voices on the phone were unusually chipper, like they were rewarding themselves for making what they believed was a fair decision. I agreed, not because I wanted to go, but because I knew this was the moment. The restaurant was bright and busy, sunlight spilling through the tall windows. They had already claimed a corner booth by the time I arrived. Elaine was there too, spinning the apartment keys around her finger like a toy. "Hey sis," she said, smirking. "I was just telling Mom and Dad how excited I am to finally decorate my place." Her words landed like stones, but instead of shrinking the way I always did, I sat straighter. My heart pounded, but there was a fire under my ribs now, one that Taylor's words had lit. Dad smiled approvingly at Elaine. "We just want her to feel secure, Natalie. You've done so well for yourself, but your sister, she needs more help." That phrase again, "she needs more. You don't need as much." I set my fork down carefully. "No," I said, my voice steady. All three of them looked at me, startled. It was the first time in years I had disrupted the script. "No," my mother repeated as if she'd misheard. I folded my hands on the table. "You didn't ask me about my apartment. You didn't consider that it's mine, that I've worked for every square foot of it. Instead, you handed it to Elaine like a hand-me-down sweater." Elaine rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. You're overreacting. It's not a big deal." I turned to her, my jaw tight. "It is a big deal. That apartment represents years of sacrifice. Nights I went without sleep, weekends I gave up, bills I struggled to pay. It's not yours to take. It's not theirs to give." My parents shifted uncomfortably, unused to my voice carrying weight at the table. Dad frowned. "Natalie, don't be dramatic. We're a family. We share." I met his gaze directly for the first time in a long time. Sharing is when you ask. This was theft. You decided my life belonged to someone else. The silence that followed was sharp, cutting through. The clatter of dishes around us. Elaine's smirk faltered. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. "I'm not fighting over an apartment," I continued, softer now but no less firm. "If Elaine wants those keys, she can keep them. But don't mistake my silence for agreement anymore. I'm done being the strong one who carries the weight so everyone else can be comfortable." I reached into my purse, pulled out my own spare set of keys, the ones I had quietly duplicated weeks ago, and placed them on the table. Their eyes widened. "I already moved out," I said, "before you ever made your little announcement. The apartment was never the prize. My life, my independence, that's what matters, and you don't get to decide who deserves that." For a moment, no one spoke. Elaine's fingers tightened around the keys like she didn't know whether to feel triumphant or embarrassed. My parents exchanged looks, the first flicker of doubt cracking through their certainty. I stood, smoothing my blazer with calm finality. "Enjoy brunch," I said, my voice steady, almost light. "I have somewhere else to be." And for the first time in years, I walked away, not invisible, not silenced, but free. The door to my new apartment clicked shut behind me with a sound that felt like closure. It was smaller than the one I'd left behind, tucked on the top floor of an older building. But sunlight poured through the skylight above the kitchen. The walls were bare, the floors scuffed in places, and the air carried the faint scent of fresh paint. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary. To me, it looked like freedom. Boxes lined the floor, most of them half unpacked. A thrifted lamp leaned against the wall, waiting for a home, and my mattress was still propped up in the living room. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was mine. Every detail of this space would be shaped by my choices, no one else's. Taylor arrived later that evening carrying a box of takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider. "A toast," she said, raising the bottle once I'd found two mismatched glasses. "To fresh starts and finally putting yourself first." We clinked glasses, laughter breaking through the heaviness that had followed me for years. As we ate cross-legged on the floor, I realized how light my chest felt. No more waiting for approval, no more shrinking to keep the peace. Just me, carving out a life that didn't require their validation. But freedom didn't mean silence anymore. The next week, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was thin, almost hesitant. "Elaine's having a hard time," she admitted. "The apartment isn't what she expected. She says it feels empty without furniture and the bills are overwhelming. She asked us to help, but we can't do everything for her." I leaned against the counter, the phone warm against my ear. For the first time, there was no sting, no pang of being overlooked. Just clarity. "I see," I said calmly. "She misses having you around," my mother added, almost as if dangling bait. "We all do." The old me would have rushed in, eager to fix, to earn love through sacrifice. But that chapter was closed. "Mom," I said gently, "I'm glad you called, but I've built something new for myself. I can't carry Elaine anymore. And I won't carry your decisions for you." There was a pause on the line, the kind that carried years of unspoken truths. "I never realized," she said finally, her voice low, "how much we took you for granted." The words were a crack in the foundation, the beginning of something I never thought I'd hear. After the call, I sat by the window, watching the city stretch out beneath me. Lights flickered in distant apartments, people moving in and out of lives I would never know. And for the first time, I wasn't jealous of anyone else's place in the world. I had my own. Meanwhile, I heard through distant conversations that Elaine was struggling to keep up. She had decorated the apartment with expensive taste, but couldn't manage the rent or the reality of independence. The place that was supposed to be her crown had become a weight around her neck. My parents, once so certain of their choice, began to look at me differently. Not with pity, not with dismissal, but with something closer to respect, and maybe even regret. But their recognition wasn't my goal anymore. My life wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally living without needing them to see me at all. And in the quiet of my new apartment, I smiled. Because I had already won. Weeks slipped into months. And with each passing day, the distance between me and my family felt less like exile and more like peace. My new apartment slowly transformed into a reflection of who I was. Plants thrived on the windowsill, books piled into messy towers beside my bed, and the walls slowly filled with art I had chosen for no one but myself. One evening, I stood on the balcony, the city lights glowing like scattered stars below. A cool breeze lifted strands of my hair, and I realized how much lighter I felt. The constant knot in my chest was gone. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was living in someone else's shadow. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Elaine. "It's harder than I thought. I don't know how you managed all this on your own." I read it twice, then set the phone down. The old me would have rushed to comfort her, to prove once again that I was the dependable one. But now, I simply let the words sit where they were. I didn't owe her an answer. Later, my parents asked to meet me. We sat in a quiet cafe, a neutral space without chandeliers or heirloom china. They looked smaller somehow, stripped of their certainty. My father cleared his throat, an unusual awkwardness in his voice. "We made mistakes," he admitted. "We thought we were helping Elaine, but in doing so, we hurt you. We took you for granted, Natalie." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the swirl of cream in the cup. Hearing the words was strange. Part of me wanted to cling to the anger I'd carried for so long, but another part, the stronger part, just felt tired, and ready to let go. "I don't need an apology," I said quietly. "I just need you to understand that I'm not invisible. My life isn't yours to decide. It never was." My mother's eyes glistened, but she nodded. For once, there was no defense, no excuses, just silence, the kind that carried truth. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt free. Their regret wasn't my closure. My closure had come the moment I chose myself, the moment I walked away from that brunch table without looking back. That night, I returned to my apartment, uncorked a small bottle of champagne I'd been saving, and stepped out onto my balcony. The skyline shimmered against the night sky, vast and unbothered by the small dramas of one family. I lifted my glass to the city, to the future, to myself, to the girl who once thought strength meant silence, to the woman who finally learned that strength meant walking away. And as the bubbles fizzed against my lips, a smile spread across my face, soft, certain, unshakable, because in the end, they hadn't given Elaine the keys to my life. I had already taken them with me,